A NASA engineer is currently missing, along with a number of other prominent scientists. A comet from outside our solar system shows water that doesn't match anything we've ever seen on Earth. Deep in Antarctica, ice turns up that basically shouldn't exist. These are real events that scientists still can't explain. We're starting with a mystery that's currently playing out in real time. So in June of 2025, an aerospace engineer named Monica Reza went missing. She's the director of materials at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or at least was. In the morning of June 22nd, she was hiking with a friend in the Angeles National Forest. According to her hiking partner, he'd stepped just a few feet ahead of her on the trail. He turned back, saw her wave and smile at him, and then he looked away for a split second to navigate a turn. When he looked back again, she was gone. There was no sound of a struggle. There was no scream, no tracks leading off the trail into the brush. Search and rescue teams spent weeks combing the area with infrared drones and canine units, but they found absolutely nothing. This would be strange enough on its own, but the FBI and a House committee are now investigating a bit of a pattern. Reza is one of roughly a dozen high-level people with above top secret clearances who vanished or died under bizarre circumstances since 2023. Another major name on that list is retired Air Force Major General William Neal McCasland, who disappeared from his home in New Mexico in February 2026. McCasland is the former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory and had overseen classified aerospace and nuclear programs. He left behind his phone and glasses, but took his hiking boots and a revolver. And these recent cases, are they all connected? We still can't say for sure, but it does seem like there's something super fishy going on. Back in March of 2026, a group of geologists working in Morocco's Dades Valley published something that genuinely messes with how we think life evolved on this planet. They found what are called wrinkle structures in rocks that are around 180 million years old, from the early Jurassic period. But what is a wrinkle structure? Basically, it's the fossilized leftovers of microbial mats, huge sheets of bacteria that used to cover the seafloor. We've always found these in shallow water and assumed the bacteria needed sunlight to survive, same as plants. But these Moroccan fossils were sitting in rock that formed at least 180 meters underwater. That's deep enough that zero sunlight reaches it. Photosynthesis is completely out of the question down there. Researchers from Harvard and Science Daily ran chemical tests on the rocks. They found high concentrations of carbon right underneath the wrinkles, a clear sign of biological activity. So these microbes weren't running on light at all. They were pulling energy straight from chemical reactions with the minerals in the Earth's crust. That process is called chemosynthesis. And if bacteria can exist in total darkness at the bottom of the ocean like this, there's a real possibility something similar is happening right now out in space, on moons like Europa or Enceladus. In April 2026, a giant radio telescope in Chile called ALMA did something that had never been done before. It detected water inside an object from another star system. The object is a comet called 3I Atlas, only the third interstellar visitor we've ever spotted. Astronomers were able to analyze it and found it contains deuterated water, which is basically a heavier version of normal water. In our solar system, comets have a pretty consistent ratio of heavy water to regular water, about one heavy molecule for every 10,000 normal ones, but in 3I Atlas, that ratio is 30 times higher. That is not a small difference. The chemistry that produces that much heavy water is very temperature sensitive, and for a comet to have this much of it, it had to form somewhere colder than 30 Kelvin. That's minus 406 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 243 degrees Celsius. So this comet came from a part of the galaxy that was colder and more shielded from radiation than the region where our sun was born. Point is, this is a real physical object telling us that other star systems can form water and planets in completely different conditions than ours. We used to assume that our solar system was kind of the default template for the universe, but this comet is proof that that may not be the case. In late 2025, a team from a group called Coldex drilled an ice core in a part of Antarctica called the Allen Hills. And what came up from the bottom was pretty strange. Instead of the clear or bluish ice you'd normally expect, the bottom of this core was a murky caramel color. When they dated it, it came back at 6 million years old. The oldest continuous ice we've ever found before this was somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million years old. This obviously blew that record completely out of the water, no pun intended. But the age isn't even the strangest part here. The strange part is that this ice exists at all. Glaciers move. Over millions of years they flow toward the ocean, they melt and get replaced. Every model we have of how Antarctica's ice sheet behaves says it's basically impossible for a pocket of ice to just sit still for 6 million years without getting crushed or swept away. Yet here it is. A team led by researchers from Oregon State University and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution found that this ice has air bubbles trapped inside it from the Miocene epoch, a time when Earth was warmer and sea levels were much higher. Scientists think the shape of the mountains surrounding the Allen Hills might have created a kind of sheltered dead zone where that ice was just left alone for millions of years. In 1992, a villager in China decided to drain a pond that locals had always believed was bottomless. Once the water was gone, though, it exposed something nobody was expecting: this massive underground chamber carved entirely out of solid rock. They drained more ponds nearby and found more of them. In total, there are 24 of these caves, all built with the same layout and covered in uniform chisel marks that line the walls, floor, and ceiling. Each cavern is huge, some reaching around 30 meters high or just under 100 feet, supported by stone columns. Researchers estimate that creating just one of these spaces would have required removing thousands of tons of rock by hand. Multiply that by 24 and you're looking at a massive project, but there's no written record of it anywhere. There are no tools left behind, no carvings or symbols explaining what they were for. They're not tombs, they're not mines, but most importantly, they're not natural formations either. The walls were clearly shaped on purpose, and the work is consistent across every cave, but historians still haven't come to a clear consensus as to what they were actually for. For something this large that workers would have spent a painstakingly long time to create, though, it's really strange that there's basically no mention of it in any historical record. There's a river deep in the Amazon rainforest in Peru that gets hot enough to boil animals alive. It's called Shenay Tempichka, which roughly translates to boiled with the heart of the sun. Locals have known about it for generations, but scientists didn't really take it seriously until a geologist named Andres Russo studied it around 2011. He measured temperatures in parts of the river reaching close to 100 degrees Celsius. That's basically boiling. Small animals that fall in can die within seconds, and what makes this hard to explain is the location. Rivers this hot are usually found near volcanoes, where magma heats up the water underground, but this river is hundreds of miles from any active volcano. The current explanation is that rainwater seeps deep underground through cracks, gets heated by geothermal energy, and then rises back up through fault lines. That idea works in theory, but it doesn't fully explain how the river stays so consistently hot over such a long stretch. It's not just like a hot spring or a small pocket, it's a full river carrying near boiling water through the jungle. For hundreds of years, people across Europe and North America have reported finding strange clumps of clear jelly on the ground, often after meteors or rainstorms. It's usually described as translucent and thankfully odorless, appearing suddenly and then disappearing just as fast. In the 1800s, it was recorded in scientific journals under the name star jelly. Some samples have been analyzed over the years. In certain cases, scientists found biological material that matched amphibian tissue like frog or toad reproductive cells that kind of swell up when exposed to water. And that explanation makes sense for some of the sightings, but it doesn't cover everything. There are reports where no animals were anywhere nearby, and others where the material didn't match any known species when it was tested. In a few modern cases, samples collected and tested showed no DNA at all. There's not a large amount of data though, because one consistent detail is how quickly this stuff disappears. Within hours, sometimes even minutes, it breaks down and it's just gone. So that makes it difficult to properly study. That's part of the reason there's still no single confirmed explanation that covers every case. In 2011, a Swedish exploration team called Ocean X was scanning the floor of the Baltic Sea when they picked up something strange on sonar. It showed up as this large circular object sitting on the seabed, almost like a ship. When they went back to check it out, divers said their equipment started glitching near the site. Cameras and satellite phones would just stop working, then come back once they moved away. They also described the object as solid and rocky with odd shapes that didn't really look like a normal natural formation. Samples from the area were later studied by geologists, including researchers from the Stockholm University, who said it was probably glacial rock shaped by moving ice during the last ice age. And that explains part of it, sure, but it still doesn't really line up with the clean, circular shapes seen on sonar or the reports of the equipment interference. Along the coast of Nova Scotia, there's a place called the Joggins Fossil Cliffs. Here you'll find fossilized trees that are still standing upright, right where they originally grew for over 300 million years. They're actual tree trunks turned to stone. Some of them are hollow, and inside those trunks, researchers have found fossils of small animals. So whatever happened here, that buried these trees pretty fast. The main explanation is that this area used to be a swampy forest hundreds of millions of years ago. Flooding would come through and dump layers of sediment over everything, burying the trees. And it would happen again and again, stacking layers on top and preserving what was underneath. That explains the general idea, but not completely. For trees to stay upright long enough to fossilize like that, they'd need to be buried pretty quickly and under very specific conditions, and not just once, but repeatedly across a large area. So it starts to look less like a slow, steady process and more like the environment kept getting hit with sudden events that buried entire sections of the forest almost all at once, and that part is still a bit of a mystery. In a remote part of Siberia, there's a strange formation known as the Potomsky Crater. It looks like a large cone made of limestone with a smaller cone rising out of its center. From above, it doesn't resemble a typical crater. It looks more like something pushed up from below. It was first studied in detail in the mid-20th century, and since then multiple research teams have tried to figure out how it formed. The obvious possibilities were ruled out early. It's not a volcano, there's no sign of lava, it's not an impact crater either, there's no evidence of a meteor strike, no fragments or shock patterns in the surrounding rock. One theory is that it could have been caused by a buildup of gas underground that eventually forced its way to the surface, and that would explain the pushed up look, at least a little. But the structure still doesn't quite match what you'd expect from something like that. There have also been reports from expeditions about other weird details nearby, like trees growing in unusual patterns around the site. Nothing extreme, but enough that researchers have taken note of it. Even now, though, there's no single explanation that really ties everything together. In January 2026, a team working with Nippon Foundation Nekton Ocean Consensus confirmed a new species. They're calling it the death ball, a carnivorous sponge found more than 3,600 meters down in the South Sandwich Trench, which sits in the South Atlantic Ocean. Normal sponges are passive things. They sit on the seafloor, they filter tiny particles out of the water, but the death ball is completely different. It's a perfect sphere covered in thousands of tiny hooks, almost like Velcro. And when a small fish or crustacean brushes against it, it gets stuck. Then the sponge's own cells slowly crawl over the prey and digest it alive. Sponges have been around for over 500 million years, and for that entire time, they've been about as threatening as SpongeBob. But then we have this newly discovered death ball. Oddly, there's no fossil evidence of anything in between the more passive filter feeders and this more predatory creature, though. On November 23rd, 2025, a volcano in Ethiopia called Haile Gubby erupted with absolutely no warning. To understand why that's a problem, you need to know what kind of volcano this is. Haile Gubby is a shield volcano. It's wide and flat, not the tall, pointy kind. Shield volcanoes are generally calm. They tend to just slowly leak lava rather than explode. And on top of that, this one was considered completely dead. It hadn't done anything since the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago. There were no sensors on it, no monitoring of any kind, because there was no reason to think anything would ever happen. But on that morning, it sent an ash cloud 14 kilometers into the sky. The ash was fine enough that it eventually drifted all the way to China. Geologists are now trying to work out why this happened with zero warning. Normally, a waking volcano, it gives you months of warning. Small earthquakes, ground swells, gases will leak out. That was not the case here at all. And that means that magma can apparently move in massive quantities deep underground without leaving any of the clues that we normally rely on to, keep people safe. And that's pretty disconcerting. In 2017, divers working off the coast of England came across something that didn't quite look like your typical 18th century shipwreck. The vessel was a Dutch trading ship that went down in the 1700s while carrying a load of silver and cargo bound for the Baltic trade routes. In the wreckage were human bones, but they weren't the usual dark, brittle remains you'd expect after 300 years underwater. These bones had a bright metallic silver color. When researchers analyzed them, they found that the calcium in the bones had been almost completely replaced by silver ions. The ship was carrying a ton of silver coins and bars, so over time, the silver leached out of the cargo and worked its way into the bones, gradually replacing the original material with metal. We know this can happen, but an example this extreme is almost unheard of, and only 3 skeletons went silver. Other remains found just meters away in the same debris field decayed normally and were mostly gone. Early in 2024, researchers using a dating technique called U-series imaging looked at cave paintings in Liang Karampong, Indonesia, confirmed they're at least 50,000 years old. That makes them some of the oldest cave paintings ever found. The art shows what looks like a hunting scene, these human-like figures hunting a large pig. The figures, though, are a bit off. Their hands have extremely long fingers that end in what look like claws. Now, at the time that this was painted, there were at least 3 species of hominid in Southeast Asia: Homo sapiens, Denisovans, and the small little Homo floresiensis, and none of them had clawed hands. Now, some researchers say the claws are just obviously artistic expression, but others point out that whoever painted this was clearly capable of drawing things realistically, like the pig, so there's also the possibility that they were depicting an actual creature of some kind. As for what that would have been, we don't know. In August of 2025, archaeologists from the Russian Academy of Sciences were digging through a burial site near the old Russian town of Suzdal when they pulled out a silver coin called a jiddle. This coin was made in the 8th century in the Hindu Kush, the mountain region that's now Afghanistan and Pakistan. According to everything we know about medieval history, organized trade between Central Russia and Central Asia didn't start until the Viking river routes opened up in the late 9th and 10th centuries. So finding this coin in the 700s in a rural Russian grave is pretty strange. It basically means people may have already been moving goods across crazy distances, over 3,000 miles of wilderness, long before we thought those trade routes even existed. In 2007, astronomers working with a radio telescope in Australia picked up something they've never seen before. It was a burst of radio energy that lasted just a few milliseconds, and then it was gone. At first they thought it was interference, something man-made, maybe a satellite, equipment noise, but then it happened again and again, and these things are now called fast radio bursts, or FRBs. They are insanely powerful. In the time it takes to blink, a single FRB can release as much energy as the sun does in days or even weeks. And they're not coming from nearby. These signals are coming from other galaxies billions of light years away. For a while, scientists thought they were one-off events, something catastrophic like a star collapsing or a neutron star collision. But then in 2016, they found one that repeats. Same location, sending out bursts over and over again. That completely broke the original theory. Since then, we've traced some FRBs back to magnetars, which are highly magnetized neutron stars. That explains a few of them, but not all. Some bursts behave differently, different patterns, different energy levels. Right now, we don't have a single explanation for all of them. Lake Hillier in Australia is bright pink. Not sometimes, not under certain lighting, it just stays pink all the time. Even when the water is taken out and put into a container, scientists have studied the lake for years. The leading explanation is that the color comes from microorganisms living in the water, especially a type of algae called Dunaliella, along with certain bacteria that produce pigments. Where it gets a bit weird, though, is the consistency. There are other lakes with similar microbes, but they don't look like this. When those same organisms are studied in labs, they don't always recreate that exact shade either. The lake is also extremely salty, which helps those microbes survive, but again, there are plenty of salty lakes around the world that aren't bright pink like this. So yeah, scientists know what's behind the color in general, but the exact mix of conditions that keeps Lake Hillier looking like that all the time, they're still not sure. In 1986, workers in Romania discovered a cave that had been completely sealed off from the surface for only about 5.5 million years. But when scientists went inside, they actually found a fully functioning ecosystem, one that obviously wasn't relying on sunlight at all. The whole food chain starts with bacteria that get their energy from chemical reactions, mainly involving sulfur and methane. Everything else down there feeds off the system in one way or another. Inside Mobile Cave, the air is nothing like what we're used to either. Oxygen is low, and there's a mix of gases that would be toxic to most animals. Somehow, that hasn't stopped it from supporting dozens of species. You've got insects, spiders, all kinds of small creatures that don't exist anywhere else on Earth. A lot of them don't even have eyes, and their bodies are pale since there's no light down there. What really stands out is how stable it all is, too. This isn't some temporary thing. The system has been running on its own for millions of years, completely cut off from the outside world, and it still manages to support multiple layers of life. Back in 1972, scientists at a uranium plant in France noticed something pretty odd. The uranium they got from a mine in Gabon, Africa was missing a bit of a key ingredient, something called uranium-235. That's the part of uranium that can create energy in nuclear reactors. So they tracked it back to where it came from, a place now called the Oklo Natural Nuclear Reactor. And what they found was pretty incredible. A long time ago, about 2 million years back, that spot basically turned into a natural nuclear reactor. The rock there had enough of that special uranium in it. Water from underground flowed through the rock, and that water helped slow things down just enough for a reaction to start. It didn't run non-stop. It would turn on, for lack of a better term, when water was there, and then shut off when the water drained away, over and over. And the chances of these ultra-specific conditions occurring in nature is just minuscule. That's what makes this so amazing. Since the James Webb Space Telescope started sending back deep space images, astronomers have been looking at galaxies from very early on in the universe's history, just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang. What they expected to see were small, still forming galaxies. Not fully developed or very massive yet, but what Webb is actually picking up is different. Some of these early galaxies already look large, organized, packed, full of stars. In some cases, they look more developed than models said they should be at that point in time. Astronomers have checked distances using how the light is stretched over time, and those measurements still point to these galaxies being extremely far away and extremely early. So the issue is not bad data. What's going on though? Well, it seems like galaxies were able to form and grow much faster in the early universe than we thought. As for why or how, they still can't say for sure. In 1859, a war between the US and Britain almost broke out, all thanks to a pig. It started on San Juan Island, a little strip of land between what's now Washington State and Canada. The US and Britain both thought they owned it because the treaty that set their border was vague about which waterway the boundary followed, so both sides moved in. British settlers working for Hudson's Bay Company and a handful of American farmers trying to claim land. For a while, they awkwardly coexisted, but then one American farmer, Lyman Cutler, found a pig rooting through his potato garden and fired at it. That pig belonged to a British man named Charles Griffin. Griffin demanded $100 in compensation. Cutler offered 10. Well, this little dispute escalated into a full-on military standoff. The Americans sent troops led by Captain George Pickett, who'd later fight at Gettysburg, while the British sent warships with over 2,000 men on board. And for weeks, they just stared at each other, armed to the teeth. Eventually, though, cooler heads prevailed and both governments agreed to share the island until it was officially settled years later. In the end, nobody died, no shots were fired, and the only casualty of what was later referred to as the Pig War was the pig. In the middle of the Cold War, the world almost ended because of a computer glitch. Luckily though, one guy kept his cool. On September 26th of 1983, a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov was working the night shift at a secret bunker near Moscow. His job was to monitor the early warning satellites that were supposed to detect incoming US nuclear missiles. Just past midnight, alarms went off. The system was screaming that an American missile had been launched, and then 4 more right after it. At the time, tensions between the US and the Soviet Union were at their absolute worst. Reagan was calling the USSR the evil empire. The Soviets had just shot down a Korean passenger plane, and both sides were running drills that looked a lot like real attacks. Soviet leadership was very on edge, convinced a first strike was coming any day. The military's official response plan was launch on warning, meaning the second they detected an attack, they'd fire back immediately. But Petrov didn't do that. He didn't think the warning made any sense. A real US strike would involve hundreds of missiles, not 5. He decided to hold off, refusing to report it up the chain until radar confirmation came through, which never did. Turned out sunlight reflecting off clouds had tricked the satellites. If he'd followed protocol, the Soviets might have launched their own nukes in response, and the world would be looking a hell of a lot different right now. In the 1600s Ottoman Empire, drinking coffee could literally get you killed. The ruler at the time, Sultan Murad IV, decided coffee was a political threat. Coffee houses in Istanbul had exploded in popularity, and just like today, these were places where people would sit around for hours talking about business, religion, whatever was bothering them about politics. Murad didn't like that people were gathering like this, sharing what he viewed as possibly dangerous ideas. He already had a reputation for being ruthless. I mean, this was a guy known for executing people over breaking curfew, so when he decided coffee was dangerous, anyone caught drinking it was gonna have problems, and that they would be beheaded on the spot. Yes, some stories even say he'd walk through Istanbul in disguise, sword in hand, personally hunting down coffee drinkers. That is insane. But like any corrupt politician, the hypocrisy was rampant. Murad himself drank coffee in private. Later rulers were a lot more chill about things. First offense, you'd just get a beating. Second offense, well, then you'd be sewn into a leather bag and tossed into the sea. By the 18th century, these bans fizzled out, fortunately, but for a while there, drinking a cup of coffee in Istanbul could literally cost you your life. You would not ever expect there to be any kind of ban on kissing in France, of all places, but back in 1910, they officially banned couples from kissing on train platforms. This was still the early days of train travel when stations were chaotic and too many trains were being delayed because people just wouldn't stop making out and doing these long, drawn-out goodbyes. The law was introduced at stations across France after a few incidents where trains left late because conductors couldn't get couples to stop blocking the doors or tracks. So the government decided to put up signs prohibiting people from kissing. The law technically stayed in place for decades afterwards, but it was rarely enforced. Do you know why the London sewer system is what it is today? It's because back in the Victorian era, the capital of the British Empire became uninhabitable from the stench of its own waste. The summer of 1858 was not fondly remembered by Londoners. It was the summer of what became known as the Great Stink. That year, the River Thames basically turned into a giant open sewer. For years, the city had been dumping human waste, animal remains, and industrial garbage straight into the river. Normally, the flow of water carried most of it away, but that summer was unusually hot for London. Temperatures hit 32 degrees Celsius or over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so everything just started to rot. The smell was unbearable. Parliament, which sat right next to the Thames, had to soak their curtains in chloride of lime just to cover up the odor. One MP wrote that the, quote, air was so bad it was not only offensive to smell, but dangerous to health. And it was deadly. The same contaminated water had already caused multiple cholera outbreaks, killing tens of thousands of people. The smell finally forced the government to act. A civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette was brought in to design a massive new sewer system, something London had resisted funding for years. On May 24th, 2024, Peng Yuzheng was testing some new paragliding gear when a freak updraft called a cloud suck pulled him straight up into the sky. He ended up 27,800 feet above the earth, basically cruising at the altitude of commercial airliners. He had a camera on his glider, so the whole terrifying experience was caught on film. In the video, he's flying through a cloud, his face and body coated in ice. He said he couldn't see where he was going. Without the compass, I wouldn't have known which way I was going. I thought I was flying straight, but in reality, I was spinning, he said. He tried to descend, but the updraft just kept pulling him higher. I wanted to come down quickly, but I just couldn't. I was lifted higher and higher until I was inside the cloud, he continued. At that height, the temperature can drop to minus 40 degrees, and Yuzheng thinks he may have lost consciousness at some point from the lack of oxygen. His accidental ascent nearly broke the world record for highest paragliding flight, a record set in 2007 by German paraglider Eva Wernerska, who was sucked into a thunderstorm and ended up 6 miles above Earth for about 45 minutes. In March 2025, Myanmar was hit by a 7.7 magnitude earthquake, and for the first time ever, a rupture in the Earth's crust was caught on camera. The footage comes from a surveillance camera in Mandalay, the country's second largest city. At first, you could just see a property gate trembling as the quake starts, cracks forming in the concrete. But then on the right-hand side of the frame, the driveway literally slides along the ground. Scientists say this is the first time fault line motion has been recorded like this. California-based earthquake geologist Wendy Bohan told the media, "My jaw hit the floor. We have laboratory models of it, but all of those are far less complex than the actual natural system. so to see it actually happening was mind-blowing. Judith Hubbard, an assistant professor at Cornell, said she keeps rewatching it. It's really kind of staggering to see a fault slide in real time, especially for someone like me, who has spent years studying these things, but always from more remote kinds of data, like offsets after the fact or data recorded by sensors, end quote. The earthquake caused massive damage, even as far away as Bangkok, and tragically, around 3,700 people died. On July 3rd, NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers captured an incredible image of a giant lightning sprite stretching above a thunderstorm over Mexico and the southern US. She snapped the image from the International Space Station. This isn't an artistic rendering or anything. Just wow. As we went over Mexico and the US this morning, I caught this sprite, Ayers wrote on X. She went on to say that sprites are, quote, TLEs, or transient luminous events, that happen above the clouds and are triggered by intense electrical activity and the thunderstorms below. We have a great view of the clouds, so scientists can use these types of pictures to better understand the formation, characteristics, and relationship of TLEs to thunderstorms, end quote. Sprites were first spotted by airline passengers back in the 50s, but they weren't photographed until 1989. And researchers still aren't sure why some storms produce them, while others don't, but seeing them from space like this, though, visually stunning. This is footage of an exploding ant. Yes, this is a real thing. Exploding ants are a group of ants with a very dramatic defense mechanism. Their colonies typically live in trees, and how these things get their name is for their ability to sacrifice themselves for the greater good of the colony when threatened by predators. Kamikaze ants would also be a great name for these things, nickname anyway. The worker ants of these species have large specialized glands that are full of all these toxic substances, and when the colony is under attack, some worker ants will rupture their own bodies, releasing this sticky, toxic stuff that takes out the intruder. It also kills the ant itself. The toxic substance released by these exploding ants is a cocktail of chemicals. It doesn't just trap and scare off predators, it also warns other colony members that there's danger afoot. The sacrifice of a few individuals helps to ensure the survival of the entire colony. Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Little Star Trek reference for you. I think Spock would like these ants. Back in 1974, a woman named Doris Bither reached out to parapsychologist Barry Taff at UCLA, saying she and her kids were experiencing some seriously strange stuff in their Culver City home. The house was in bad shape, condemned, and Bither was living there illegally with her 4 children. On top of that, Bither had a rough history. She'd struggled with violent partners and substance problems and had a pretty traumatic childhood. But she claimed that invisible entities had attacked her. Taff and his colleague Carrie Gaynor visited the house multiple times over 10 weeks, starting on August 22nd, 1974. They reported what they called poltergeist activity, objects falling off shelves on their own cold spots, bad odors, strange lights. The intensity of these events seemed to fade over time, though. They were also sometimes joined by a friend of Bither's who said she could talk to spirits, plus various people connected to the UCLA lab, but only Taff, Gaynor, and Bither described anything unusual themselves. And they took photos with a Polaroid and a 35mm camera that had become pretty well known in paranormal circles. Taff believed there was a genuine haunting going on here, and these images were just the tip of the iceberg. Ever seen lightning strike an erupting volcano? Well, here it is. Last year in Guatemala, people watching the eruption of Volcan de Fuego got a rare sight. Lightning bolts flashing straight out of the erupting volcano. Volcanic lightning is a real thing. When a volcano erupts, it shoots ash, gas, and rock into the air. Those ash particles collide with each other, and every collision builds up static electricity. The Center for the Study of Active Volcanoes at the University of Hawaii at Hilo explains that as the ash rubs together, atoms shed or pick up electrons, creating zones with positive and negative charges. When the imbalance gets strong enough, those electrons jump through the air to even things out. That jump is what we see as lightning. Scientists even have a name for it: a dirty thunderstorm. I like that. In 2015, something strange started happening off the coast of Alaska near the Kodiak archipelago. People began finding dead whales. A lot of them. By the time researchers got there, they'd counted around 30 carcasses. Most of them fin whales. all stranded or floating nearby. What really threw scientists off was that they all seemed to have died around the same time. First, they suspected a toxic algae bloom, which can sometimes poison marine life, but that theory didn't really hold up. No other species were dying off like this, and the ocean conditions didn't match that. A few months earlier, huge numbers of seabirds had mysteriously died in the same area, though, so researchers figured there could be a connection there, but they never found a clear answer. Some scientists think there were probably even more whales that died but drifted away or were eaten before anyone could find them. This video you're seeing here was not created with AI. In 2023, a video from Fallbrook Houston News started making the rounds, showing this massive sinkhole tearing open a road. At first, there's already a big hole, and then you watch it just keep getting bigger and bigger as the ground gives way. The concrete cracks, the asphalt folds in, chunks of the road just fall out. What makes it even crazier though is people are just standing a few feet away filming the whole thing. You can see the edges shifting where they're standing and nobody's moving. Like water's rushing underneath, washing away the dirt, and the hole keeps widening while everyone just stays there watching. I mean, some people are kind of moving away, but not fast enough. I mean, if I saw this, I'd think Satan was about to pop out of the ground. I would not be standing around like that. This video is not AI either. I gotta say that. But these days, when I see anything even mildly extraordinary online, I gotta take a moment to figure that out. But anyway, no, this was filmed by a guy named Ronald Drago. Looks like a sea serpent, but it's actually a massive sturgeon. I mean, it's basically a sea serpent though. Look at the size of this thing. Sturgeons have been around since the Jurassic period as well, and they haven't changed much since then. Some of them can reach lengths of over 20 feet and weigh more than 1,000 pounds, which puts them in the same size range as a great white shark. They're bottom feeders, mostly eating small fish and crustaceans, and they're not dangerous on purpose, but because of their size, they can be. There have been real cases of sturgeons leaping out of the water and hitting people on boats. Let's talk about another creature, smaller, but possibly stranger, the hairy frog found in Central African forests. I had no idea these things existed, and they had to be the creepiest frog species I've ever heard of. I mean, look at this thing. Hairy frogs, also known as horror frogs or Wolverine frogs, are really cool, not your typical cute kind of frog. These things have a very bizarre defense mechanism, for a frog anyway, but I'll get to that in a minute. So these frogs get their name because they have what looks like hair on the sides of their bodies and thighs. It isn't actually hair though, it just has the appearance of it. It's actually called dermal papillae, which contains blood vessels. So the hair-looking stuff is thought to help them breathe better. So how do they get the Wolverine nickname? Well, this is pretty cool. So these frogs have the ability to break their own bones. So when they're threatened, they can force the bones in their toes through the skin, essentially creating claws like Wolverine. Pretty wild. In 1932, Australia declared war on emus, and the emus won. After World War I, the government gave land in Western Australia to returning soldiers so they could farm wheat. But then 20,000 emus migrated into the area after breeding season and started destroying everything, tearing up fences, eating crops, basically wiping out their livelihoods. The farmers asked the government for help, and since most of them were veterans, they didn't get scarecrows, they got soldiers. The military sent Major G.P.W. Meredith and his men, armed with 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The plan was to eliminate the emus in just a few days. Instead, it turned into an embarrassing disaster. The birds were too fast, too spread out, somehow way smarter than anyone expected. They moved in small groups, then zigzagged away from the onslaught, and even when cornered, the soldiers' firearms would often jam or they would miss. After weeks of chasing birds across the outback, they'd fired thousands of rounds and killed only a few hundred. The rest just ran off. Reporters started calling it the Great Emu War, and Major Meredith had to admit defeat, saying the emus had the quote invulnerability of tanks. One of the weirdest disasters in US history happened in Boston back in 1919, and it involved molasses. A massive storage tank in the North End neighborhood burst, unleashing over 2 million gallons of thick, sticky molasses into the streets. The wave was 25 feet high and moving about 35 miles an hour, fast enough to crush buildings, flip trucks, and knock a streetcar off its tracks. People described hearing this deep roar, like a freight train, before being swept up in the goo. It trapped everything: people, horses, cars. Some victims drowned because the syrup hardened in the cold air before rescuers could reach them. In total, 21 people were killed and around 150 were injured. Turns out the company responsible, Purity Distilling, hadn't even tested the tank properly. It leaked, often so badly that people would come to collect dripping molasses to use at home, and instead of fixing this, the company just painted the tank brown to hide the leaks. After it burst, the cleanup took weeks, and for decades afterward, people swore the area still smelled like molasses on particularly hot days. In 1814, a London brewery accidentally unleashed a flood of beer into the streets. It started at the Moen Company Brewery, where they made porter, a super popular dark beer at the time. Inside the brewery was this massive wooden vat, 22 feet tall, holding more than 300,000 gallons of beer. One afternoon, a metal band holding the vat slipped loose. Workers didn't panic. Apparently that happened all the time, but an hour later, the whole thing exploded. The pressure from all that beer was so strong, it blew down the brewery's back wall, and the wave of porter, about 15 feet high, tore through the streets. 2 houses were completely destroyed, and the beer flooded people's basements. 8 people were killed, including mourners at a funeral wake who got swept away by this tsunami of beer. Imagine being killed at a funeral. That'd be like getting married at someone else's wedding. In 1976, the Korean Demilitarized Zone became the site of a deadly incident over a tree trimming. 2 U.S. officers, Captain Boniface and First Lieutenant Barrett, were killed by North Korean soldiers while trying to trim a tree that was blocking the line of sight between checkpoints. 3 days later, the United States and South Korea responded with one of the most over-the-top displays of military power in history, but without any casualties. They launched Operation Paul Bunyan, named of course after the legendary lumberjack. Their mission was to remove that goddamn tree and show North Korea just how deadly they could be if they wanted to. The operation was massive. Engineers with chainsaws went to work while hundreds of soldiers surrounded them, fully armed. Overhead, there were 20 helicopters, B-52 bombers flew nearby, and fighter jets from multiple bases patrolled the area. Altogether, over 800 soldiers were involved in this. The North Koreans showed up with about 150 to 200 troops and just watched, clearly taken aback by the massive display of force. In the end, no shots were fired and no one was hurt except for that damn tree. In 1962, a small village in Tanganyika, now Tanzania, experienced one of the weirdest outbreaks in history: uncontrollable laughter. It all started at a girls' boarding school. 3 students suddenly started breaking out into laughter and they couldn't stop. Within days, the entire school was caught up. By the end of the first wave, 95 out of 159 girls were laughing nonstop. Some for hours, some for over 2 weeks. It got so bad the school had to close, and when it reopened, another group of students got hit, and eventually the epidemic spread to nearby villages too, shutting down 14 schools. This was manic, hysterical laughter. It was like Joker's laughing gas. People couldn't breathe properly, there was fainting. Some kids also started developing mysterious rashes. Doctors couldn't find a virus or anything contagious going on. They decided this was a case of stress-induced mass hysteria, or what scientists call mass psychogenic illness. Some people think it happened because Tanganyika had just become independent. Students were under a lot of pressure, home life was super strict, but at school they were being introduced to all these new ideas. Basically, the kids didn't know how to deal with all that stress, so they just laughed and they couldn't stop.
Number 10. Virus outbreak. Now, I know what you're thinking. Duh, they caught that virus in 2020, but no, I'm talking about a different one. At Disneyland, between December 17th and December 20th, 2014, visitors to the park were exposed to measles, resulting in an outbreak that affected the residents of 8 US states as well as Mexico and Canada. The California Department of Public Health was first notified of a suspected measles case on January 5th, 2015, and by February 11th, 2015, at least 39 individuals who had visited at least one of the 2 adjacent Disney parks during the exposure period had become ill. In addition to this likely direct exposure, secondary and unknown transmissions were numerous, resulting in at least 125 cases within the United States by February 11th, 2015. The specific outbreak was declared over in the US in mid-April 2015 after 42 days with no traceable transmissions and 147 having been affected within the United States. This measles outbreak, though, resulted in no known deaths. Number 9. Ashes spread. There's a very popular urban legend that Disney World is full of scattered human remains. World is full of scattered human ashes, particularly in certain parts of the park such as the Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, and It's a Small World. It's been proven that guests frequently release human ashes within the Disney parks, and Disney understands that this could be a cathartic process for those grieving, but it's important to realize that this violates Disney's rules and also local laws about scattering remains. Disney has specifically spoken out, telling the Wall Street Journal that this type of behavior is strictly prohibited and unlawful. Not only is this against the park policy, but any guests spreading ashes will be escorted off the property. This is taken very seriously and is referred to by cast members as a HEPA cleanup incident, since it requires a special cleaning protocol to remove the ash residue. When guests do succeed in scattering ashes on attractions, there are a lot of repercussions. Not only could they be banned from future entry, but it's also disruptive to others enjoying the park. These attractions and areas need to be shut down for technical difficulties, and it delays other people's experiences. It's said that this happens at least once a month. Number 8. Leaving a guest paralyzed. In 1983, James Higgins, who was 18 at the time, fell off Space Mountain at Disneyland and was paralyzed from the waist down, and he suffered from brain damage. He tumbled out of a speeding car and was found unconscious under the tracks of Space Mountain. He tried suing Disney and asked for more than $7 million in damages and compensation. His attorneys claimed that the restraining lap bar used on the high-speed roller coaster type ride at the time of the incident was improperly designed and could have allowed a rider to remove it. During the trial, the jury was taken to the park to ride Space Mountain, and several of the ride's cars were brought into the courtroom to demonstrate their use. A physicist called by Disneyland attorneys said that the lap bar appeared to be defective, but added that gravity probably would have kept the rider from falling out if he followed park instructions. Park attorneys said that James was intoxicated at the time of the incident and trying to show off for friends when he tumbled off the ride. In the end, the jury found Disneyland was not liable for his injuries. Number 7. Harassment of workers. It seems like wherever you work in the customer service industry, you are bound to deal with customers who go too far. Unfortunately, Disney is no exception, and it happens more particularly to female employees who are dressed up as face characters, like those who walk around dressed as a Disney princess. A lot of them have experienced harassment, and an ex-Disney park employee wrote on Reddit about her experience. She said, "I was a Tinkerbell performer for Walt Disney World about 3 years ago, and I can't count how many times people asked me what was under my dress or tried to touch me inappropriately. I would always shame them to my photo pass attendant, their family, and people in line by loudly exclaiming, 'You want to know what's under my dress? Well, there's pixie dust, of course.' Or, 'This man is a pirate. He's trying to reach the pixie dust that I keep under my dress.' And then they'd walk away in shame like the creepy people they are." Now, since face characters are never allowed to break character, there isn't much they can do about the harassment, which is pretty scary. Number 6. People taking their own lives. With a place like Disney, it's shocking that there are so many people who go there to end their life. Unfortunately, this has happened many times over the years. The main place for this is at Disneyland in California and is at the Mickey and Friends parking structure. The first account happened in 2010 when a 61-year-old man jumped from the top floor of the parking structure. He left behind a note explaining his personal issues were the reason why he did that. In 2012, a 23-year-old man was found near the northwest corner of the parking structure and was pronounced dead at the scene. It was investigated as if the man had taken his own life at the time, crime, but there were no witnesses. In 2016, a 40-year-old man jumped from the parking structure just after 2 a.m. He was rushed to UC Irvine Medical Center and pronounced dead at 3:08 a.m. And now the most recent death took place in December of 2022, where a 51-year-old elementary school principal jumped from the top floor and was pronounced dead at the scene. These stories are all so sad, and if you ever get these feelings, please know that there are people and resources to help you.
And at number 6, we have the Somerton Man. So this all started when an unidentified man was found dead on Somerton Beach near Adelaide in 1948. In his pocket, authorities discovered a scrap of paper with the words Tamam Shud, meaning ended or finished in Persian. This scrap was traced to a rare book of Persian poetry found in an abandoned car near the beach, which contained a secret code that has still never been deciphered. And there were extensive investigations, but the man's identity still unknown, and the cause of death still unconfirmed. Autopsy results suggested poisoning, but the specific poison used was never identified, and even more strange, all the labels had been removed from his clothing, and there was no identifying marks or documents in his possession. Like with any mysterious case, this one has given rise to a number of theories and speculations, espionage, a secret love affair, but despite amateur detectives and even experts' attempts to crack the case, the mystery of the Somerton Man is still a mystery. We're taught a lot about World War II in school, and rightfully so, but there's a very interesting unit of the Allied forces that you probably weren't taught about, the Ghost Army. During World War II, a highly secretive unit known as the Ghost Army played an interesting strategic role in deceiving the enemy. The unconventional unit was composed of artists, designers, and even actors tasked with creating elaborate deceptions to mislead the Axis forces. They employed a wide range of clever tactics, inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery to create the illusion of this massive military presence where there were actually just a few soldiers. These inflatable props, known as rubber dummies, were so convincing from a distance that they fooled enemy reconnaissance planes. The sound and radio deception were also major components of their operations. They broadcast like fake radio transmissions, imitating the sounds of large army movements, complete with phony chatter and like code words. This all misled the enemy about the locations and intentions of Allied forces. And they would also use deceptive camouflage techniques like painting fake vehicle tracks and creating dummy airfields to divert enemy attention away from the actual Allied targets. This unit played a big role in some significant portions of the war, like the Normandy invasion and the Battle of the Bulge, by confusing and distracting the enemy. But a lot of us didn't learn about this in school because the Ghost Army's existence remained top secret for decades after the war, with their efforts only becoming declassified in the 90s. Number 4, the Bassano Vase. The Bassano Vase, or vase, a cursed, spooky tale connected to an old vase from the 15th century. This vase, also known as the unlucky vase, has a creepy reputation for causing terrible luck and even death to its owners. The story goes that the vase was made in Italy as a wedding gift, but brought misfortune to the newlywed. Bride died unexpectedly soon after the wedding, and from there, things only got worse for the owners. Accidents, illnesses, and untimely deaths seemed to follow anyone who came into possession of the thing. Even people who just handled it reported bad luck, injuries, and just a general sense of doom surrounding it. And because of all this dark history, the Bassano vase, or vase, has garnered quite the reputation and has survived through the years, now sitting in an Italian museum. Visitors are warned about its curse, and many find it eerie and unsettling to be around. Next on the list, we have the Devil's Footprints. In February of 1855 in Devon, England, all you English people, you always schooling me on the pronunciation. Is it Devon? Devon? Anyway, a series of mysterious footprints resembling cloven hooves appeared across a vast area of snow-covered terrain spanning roughly 40 to 100 miles. Local residents were unsurprisingly pretty surprised and deeply unsettled by these odd China tracks. Each footprint measured about 4 inches in length, followed a consistent single file pattern, as if they were left behind by a two-legged creature with hooves. Now, there's not a lot of solid evidence to sift through with this case, which makes it hard to really take a stance on. It's not like we have photographs of the tracks or anything. Still unknown exactly what caused these tracks. There are tons of theories, of course. Maybe it was just an elaborate hoax, or maybe there was something supernatural going on. Considering when this happened, someone pointed to the devil being the most likely culprit at the time, and, who's to say, right? It could have been Satan. There's also speculation that it could have been caused by some exotic animal, like a kangaroo, somehow made its way over there. There aren't any known records of kangaroos having been in the area at the time, of course. Most likely this was Satan. And at number 2, we have the Flannan Isles lighthouse disappearance. This revolves around the eerie disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers on a remote Scottish island in 1900. On one December morning, a passing ship noticed something strange. The lighthouse's signal wasn't lit. When they attempted to make contact via signal rockets and a horn, there was no response. So concerned, they reported the situation to the mainland. A rescue party was dispatched to the island, and upon arrival, they found the lighthouse keeper's quarters in a state of disarray. The beds appeared to have been hastily abandoned. Personal belongings were left behind. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, though. The kitchen table had even been set for a meal. Even stranger, one of the clocks had stopped, and the lighthouse's logbook contained some strange entries. On December 15th, an entry noted severe winds, but the final log entry on December 26th simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." There were searches of the island and its surroundings, but the 3 lighthouse keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were never found. And coming in at number 1, we have the USS Cyclops. Yes, we have a Bermuda Triangle mystery for you. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918 is a maritime mystery that has never been solved. This massive US Navy cargo ship with 309 people on board vanished without a trace while traveling in the Bermuda Triangle, a region known for its mysterious ship and plane disappearances, of course. The USS Cyclops was on a routine voyage from Brazil to Baltimore, Maryland, carrying a load of manganese ore, but it never arrived at its destination, and no distress signals or messages were ever received. There was a massive search by both the US Navy and the Coast Guard, but no wreckage or debris from the ship was ever found. The ship that just kind of vanished into thin air. Numerous theories had been proposed to explain the disappearance: storms, structural issues, possible sabotage. Some, of course, believe that the Bermuda Triangle's supposed supernatural properties played a role here, while others suggest the ship may have fallen victim to enemy action. This was during World War I. The USS Cyclops remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in maritime history and the largest loss of life in history of the United States Navy, not directly involving combat. In the early days of the universe, about 1 billion years after the Big Bang, James Webb spotted something unexpected: tiny glowing crimson pinpricks. Astronomers simply called them little red dots. Based on their light, these dots seem to be small galaxies packed with an impossible number of stars, so many that they shouldn't have been able to form that quickly. But there was an alternative theory. Those red glows might not be stars at all, but rather gas falling into massive black holes. To figure it out, researchers pointed the Chandra X-ray Observatory at them. The logic was, if these were massive black holes, they should be blasting out high-energy X-rays. But when the data came back, Chandra saw nothing. There were no X-rays detected from most of these dots. This created a massive contradiction. They are galaxies. They contain way too many stars for their age. If they're black holes, they are X-ray faint, which goes against almost everything we know about how black holes behave when they're eating. One idea is that these black holes might be buried under such thick clouds of gas and dust that even the X-rays are being smothered before they can reach our telescopes, but we still don't have a definitive answer. Deep under Antarctica's Ross Sea, methane gas is escaping from the ocean floor. This shouldn't really be happening, at least not yet. See, for a long time, we've known that huge amounts of methane are trapped under the Antarctic ice, but the assumption was that the freezing temperatures and pressure kept it stable. Then in 2011, a group of divers came across an active leak. It was the first time anyone had seen the gas bubbling up from the seafloor in this region. The mystery isn't just that it's leaking though, it's that the leak is happening in a part of the ocean that hasn't really warmed up much. So scientists can't just chalk this up to rising temperatures. Deep sea microbes also typically migrate to these leaks and eat the methane before it can reach the atmosphere, but when researchers returned to this site, they found that the microbes were incredibly slow to respond. It took 5 years for a tiny colony to form, and even then, they weren't consuming enough of the gas to stop it from escaping. We don't know why the methane started moving on its own or why the microbes are failing to keep up. For decades, people working at high-security nuclear sites have been seeing things in the sky. More than just strange lights, too. I mean accounts of solid metallic discs or cigar-shaped objects hovering right over missile silos. The most famous case happened at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. Witnesses there described a glowing red orb hanging around the front gate. While that was happening, 10 different nuclear missiles went completely offline at the same time. The weird part is that when technicians went to fix them, they couldn't find a single mechanical issue. The missiles just turned off and then eventually came back on. And this hasn't just happened once. Similar reports have come out of Minnow Air Force Base and sites in the UK. On radar, these objects have been clocked moving at thousands of miles per hour and pulling these impossibly sharp turns. What are these things? Why are they so interested in nuclear technology? There are plenty of theories, none have been proven, and if there is a definitive answer, it hasn't been made public. For a long time, the rulebook for life on Earth was pretty simple. You need sunlight to make oxygen. Plants, algae, and certain bacteria soak up the sun and pump out the air we breathe. But in July 2024, a team of researchers realized that rule doesn't apply to the deep ocean. While studying the seafloor over 13,000 feet down in the Pacific, they found that oxygen levels were actually increasing in total darkness. There is zero sunlight at that depth, so photosynthesis is impossible. The culprits behind this are these small rocks called polymetallic nodules. They look like pieces of coal, but they're packed with metals like cobalt, nickel, and manganese. And when researchers tested them, they found these rocks were carrying an electric charge. The voltage is high enough to trigger a process that splits water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. This is a pretty incredible discovery. It means that oxygen can be produced purely by geology without any help from living organisms or the sun. It really challenges the entire timeline of how we think of life beginning, because it means that oxygen-breathing creatures could have evolved long before the first plants ever showed up. There's a massive structure in deep space that is currently breaking our understanding of how the universe is put together. It's called the Giant Arc, a string of galaxies that stretches over 3 billion light years across. To put that in perspective, it would take about 20 of our own Milky Way galaxies lined up end to end just to cover the width of this thing. The reason this is such a headache for astronomers is because of something called cosmological principle. This is a fundamental rule of physics, which states that when you look at the universe on a large enough scale, everything should look more or less the same. Matter should be spread out relatively evenly, but this thing is basically a giant clump. It's like looking at a calm ocean, then suddenly seeing a single wave that's just 5 miles high for some reason. Scientists aren't really sure why.
On the island of Öland in Sweden sits the ruins of Sandbyborg, an Iron Age ring fort. For centuries, locals avoided the site, whispering that it was cursed. Archaeologists now know why. Around the late 5th century, the fort's entire population was slaughtered. Excavations revealed families killed inside their homes, skeletons lying where they fell. Nothing was looted. Weapons, jewelry, even livestock were left untouched, as if attackers wanted the place to remain frozen in time. For more than 1,000 years, no one resettled the fort. It became a literal ghost village, avoided by locals who sensed something unnatural had happened here. To this day, we don't know who carried out the massacre or why. All that remains is an eerie silence, as though the land itself remembers the horror. The early 20th century brought one of the coldest rivalries in history. Who would be the first to reach the South Pole? Two men led the charge, Norwegian Roald Amundsen and British explorer Robert Falcon Scott. Amundsen's team used dog sleds, moved quickly, and planted the Norwegian flag at the pole in December 1911. Scott, however, took a slower route with ponies and motor sledges. By the time his team arrived in January 1912, they were devastated to find the flag already there. The return journey was a nightmare. Facing frostbite, starvation, and blizzards, Scott and his companions all perished in their tent just 11 miles from a supply depot. When their frozen bodies were discovered months later, Scott's diary told the grim tale of their slow decline. The South Pole race became not just an adventure story, but a real tragedy that reads like the climax of a survival horror novel. In 1897, Swedish engineer Salomon August Andre had a bold idea. Why not drift across the Arctic Ocean in a giant hydrogen balloon? He believed it would be faster than sleds and safer than ships. Spoiler alert, it was not. Andre and his two companions launched from Svalbard, Norway. Almost immediately, the balloon began leaking gas and crashing into the icy wasteland. For weeks, the three men stumbled across the Arctic, leaving behind eerie journals describing frostbite, exhaustion, and desperation. They eventually disappeared. Their remains weren't discovered until 1930, more than 3 decades later, perfectly preserved along with their photographs and diaries. The recovered records read like a horror story written in real time, the optimism of a bold plan unraveling into tragedy under the endless polar night. Not all horror stories are disasters. Some are deliberate. In the mid-18th century, the Qianlong Emperor of the Qing dynasty in China gave a chilling order: the complete extermination of the Zungar people. The Zungar, a Mongol ethnic group living in what is now Xinjiang, had resisted Qing rule throughout repeated uprisings. Finally, the emperor declared that the Zungar had proven themselves too troublesome to be allowed to live. He commanded his generals not to accept any surrender, claiming that any plea for mercy was just a trick. What followed was a campaign of extermination that wiped out much of the Zungar population through killings, famine, and disease. Modern historians describe it as one of the clearest cases of genocide in early modern history. Entire communities were erased from the map, leaving a silence that still lingers in Central Asia today. Picture this. It's the 1920s and no one has ever stood on the roof of the world. Before oxygen tanks, high-tech gear, or GPS mapping, the first climbers to attempt Mount Everest faced a mountain that might as well have been another planet. In 1924, George Mallory and Andrew Irving made their infamous attempt. They were last spotted climbing high on the northeast ridge, less than 1,000 feet from the summit, before clouds swallowed them whole. They never came back down. Their disappearance haunted explorers for decades. Mallory's body wasn't discovered until 1999, perfectly preserved by the ice, still wearing his climbing gear. No one knows if they reached the top before they died, but the mountain kept their secret. Imagine vanishing into the world's deadliest peak only to reappear 75 years later, as if time had frozen. It's history with the chill of a ghost story. The French Revolution promised liberty, equality, and fraternity, but it also delivered one of the most terrifying chapters in European history. Between 1793 and 1794, during the Reign of Terror, France's revolutionary leaders turned the guillotine into a symbol of both justice and fear. Tens of thousands were executed for alleged disloyalty, including nobles, priests, and even ordinary citizens accused by neighbors. In some regions, people weren't just beheaded, they were drowned in mass in rivers like the Loire. The entire country lived in paranoia, knowing a careless word could end with a march to the scaffold. The Sanson family, executioners of Paris for generations, later published memoirs describing their work. Reading them today feels like flipping through the journals of a grim reaper. The Enlightenment had promised progress, but for those living in revolutionary France, it was survival in a world that had turned into a real-life horror show. In the 20th century, Romania's dictator Nicolae Ceausescu created a reign of terror that felt ripped from a dystopian novel. He built a personality cult so extreme that his face appeared on everything, from coins to textbooks, while his people suffered under shortages of food, medicine, and even electricity. By 1989, the Romanian people had had enough. Protests erupted and Ceausescu tried to rally the crowds with one last speech, but instead of cheering, they booed him on live television, a sound he had never heard before. Within days, Ceausescu and his wife Elena were captured. On Christmas Day, they were put on trial by a hastily formed tribunal, accused of crimes against the people, and executed by firing squad. The fall of his regime was sudden, shocking, and chaotic, like the abrupt end of a dictator's horror story playing out on the world stage. Imagine being in Rome at the height of its power, only to watch it crumble under a sickness no one understood. Between 165 and 180 CE, the Antonine Plague swept through the empire, killing millions. Contemporary accounts describe victims with fevers, black sores, and unbearable thirst. Whole towns were depopulated. Soldiers died by the thousands, crippling Rome's legions. Even Emperor Marcus Aurelius couldn't escape its grip, recording in his writings how the empire itself seemed poisoned. Historians debate whether it was smallpox or measles, but either way, the Antonine Plague left Rome reeling. Streets filled with uncollected corpses, funeral pyres smoked day and night, and panic spread across the empire. It was an ancient pandemic that felt like the wrath of the gods, and it nearly broke the world's greatest superpower of the time. Over 4,000 years, the Akkadian Empire ruled Mesopotamia. Then, almost as quickly as it had risen, it fell apart in what can only be described as one of the earliest apocalyptic collapses. According to a surviving Sumerian text, King Naram-Sin angered the gods by defiling a temple. The punishment was catastrophic: droughts, crop failures, invasions, and plague. Archaeology backs this up. Around 2200 BCE, records show trade routes collapsed, cities were abandoned, and skeletal remains revealed famine-stricken populations. To the people of the time, it must have felt like the end of the world. Their empire didn't just fall, it evaporated, leaving behind only broken walls, scattered bones, and a chilling story etched in clay tablets that reads like a curse. You don't usually think of beer as deadly, but in London in 1814 it became a killer. At the Mew and Company Brewing, a massive vat holding over 300,000 gallons of beer suddenly ruptured. The wave that followed tore through nearby streets, collapsing walls and filling cellars. Several people drowned, unable to escape basements that filled with beer faster than they could climb out. Newspapers described the scene as both tragic and bizarre. Rescue workers struggling while bystanders tried to scoop up free beer with pots and pans. The neighborhood smelled of alcohol for weeks. Today, it almost sounds like a grim parody, a flood of beer sweeping through a city like something from a dark folk tale, but it was very real, and for the victims, it was definitely no laughing matter.
In 2024, scientists in India published their findings on a prehistoric monster that makes modern anacondas look like garden snakes. They found the remains of Vasuki indicus, a snake that lived about 47 million years ago. Based on the size of its vertebrae, they estimated this thing could reach up to 50 feet in length. Finding a giant fossil is cool, but the mystery here is actually about the weather. Snakes are cold-blooded, which means their body temperature and size are directly limited by how warm their environment is. For a snake to grow to 50 feet, it needs a constant extreme level of heat. The problem is that our current climate models for that time period don't show the Earth being especially hot. If this snake existed, it means the global temperatures 47 million years ago were a lot hotter than what we've been telling people for decades. It could mean that our understanding of the Earth's past climate is missing a huge piece of the puzzle. We're either wrong about how snakes grow, or we're very wrong about how hot the planet used to be. Imagine you're reading a history book that goes from the year 500 right up to 1500, but when you turn the page, the next chapter suddenly starts in the year 2024. A huge chunk of the story gone. That is exactly what's happening in the Earth's crust, a phenomenon called the Great Uniformity. In rock formations all over the world, including the Grand Canyon, there's a point where 500 million-year-old rock sits directly on top of rock that is over 1 billion years old. That means roughly 500 million to 1 billion years of geological history just isn't there. It's not just missing in one spot either. The gap appears on almost every continent. Geologists have been debating for years where all that rock went. One theory is that during a period called Snowball Earth, massive glaciers acted like giant sandpaper, grinding away miles of the Earth's crust and washing it in the oceans. But that theory doesn't explain everything, because some of the missing rock seems to have vanished at different times in different places, so we can't blame it all on a single global freeze. Pretty strange. In 2019, the Chinese Yutu-2 rover was exploring a crater on the far side of the moon when it spotted something odd. In the middle of the dry lunar soil was a patch of material that looked almost gel-like. In a place as dry and desolate as the moon, seeing something that looks wet or slimy is not what you're expecting. Scientists spent over a year analyzing the data before they finally released an official explanation. They concluded that the gel was actually a type of glass. The idea is that a meteor hit the moon, the intense heat melted the soil into a dark, shiny green glass. This has happened before, but the specific color and consistency of this patch didn't quite match the samples brought back by the Apollo missions. Even with the glass explanation too, there's still a bit of debate. The way the material was clumped together and how it reflected light was kinda unusual, and some researchers think it might involve a specific mineral composition we haven't fully documented on the far side of the moon yet. In August of 1994, people in Oakville, Washington woke up to a very bizarre and rather revolting scene. Instead of rain, tiny gelatinous blobs were falling from the sky. And it was bad enough that goo was dropping down on people's heads, but then people started getting sick. There were reports of severe flu-like symptoms, respiratory issues, and intense dizziness that lasted for weeks. One woman even took a sample of the substance to a lab at the Washington State Department of Ecology. A microbiologist there looked at it under a microscope and found that the blobs contained two types of bacteria, one of which is found in the human digestive system. Over the years, theories have gone everywhere. Some people suspected the military had been carrying out some kind of testing. Others thought the blobs might be pulverized jellyfish waste that had been sucked up into the clouds by offshore military bombing practice and then rained back down. Another theory is that they were star jelly. We talked about star jelly in part 2 of this series. The biggest problem with solving the case, though, is that the original samples eventually vanished from the labs. So without the physical evidence, scientists can't really confirm anything. It's especially odd, though, that people were getting sick in this case. That wasn't really a thing in most standard star jelly cases. About 10 years ago, astronomers spotted a star in the Cygnus constellation doing something unexpected. It's officially called KIC 8462852, but everyone just calls it Tabby's star. Usually when a star flickers, it's because a planet is passing in front of it, which might block maybe 1% of the light, but Tabby's star was suddenly dropping by 22%. That isn't a planet, that's something way more massive. Researchers have spent the last decade throwing every theory they have at this thing. They thought maybe it was a giant swarm of comets, but you'd need thousands of them all hitting the same spot at the same time, which is statistically not very likely. They looked at dust clouds too, but the way the light changed didn't match the signature of space dust at all. And it gets even weirder though. The star isn't just flickering, it's actually fading away. When scientists look back at old photos from the late 1800s, they realize the star is about 14% dimmer now than it was a century ago. There is no known reason for a stable, middle-aged star to just slowly lose its shine like that. Because none of the natural explanations really seemed to work, the star became the center of this huge alien megastructure debate. Some astronomers are still seriously considering the idea that there is some kind of massive project built to harvest the star's energy. Most scientists are still holding out for a natural answer, of course, but so far, no one's been able to make the math work for the flickering and the fading at the same time. So at this point, we still can't say for sure.
10. Genetically modified viruses could wipe humanity out. Yep, this isn't just a plot to a movie. While humans have wiped out many illnesses over the last century thanks to vaccines and better health practices, it is possible that some of these past diseases might come back to haunt us. With the introduction of genetic editing tools like CRISPR, humanity is moving into an era where it can customize medicine to an individual person, matching treatment directly to their genes. However, scientists are beginning to worry about the opposite: genetically modified viruses that are made to be more lethal. Samples of eradicated deadly viruses often still exist, and with the right tools and knowledge, it is becoming more and more possible that a malicious scientist could modify these and bring them back. The genetic code for many old viruses is actually readily available online. Reverse engineering these to create a new superbug would take some time and effort, but it could be done. And it's even possible to create brand new viruses from scratch using these tools. These viruses could even be tailored to only attack certain targets, like people with red hair or only males, making them effective for genocide, which is scary. Number 9. Extreme surveillance. Surveillance has become a daily part of life, with cameras following you in public and digital breadcrumbs showing what people do and consume every day. But things are likely to get even scarier in the near future. As noted by The Verge, AI is going to be a game changer in the world of surveillance. Now, not only will technology be able to track you every step of your life, but there will be AI collecting it without any human oversight. So that's cool. What this means is that you'll have the data and processing power to effectively watch a person 24 hours a day, and all without the need for a human to examine the data. As noted by TechCrunch, the future of privacy will likely be less about preventing surveillance and more about users consenting to how their data is used. As an example, police in Chicago recently announced a partnership with Ring, manufacturer of video doorbells, where authorities can request access to videos from citizens' devices. The data is being collected regardless, but the owner has to agree to it being used by the police. It seems like full round-the-clock surveillance for everyone is a very likely possibility in the near future. Anyone else thinking this sounds like the plot of 1984? Number 8. Automation will continue to affect employment. Throughout the last century, humanity has made machines that make jobs easier, but at the cost of employment. A classic example of this is the horse buggy manufacturers. Once cars became common, the industry dried up and was no longer necessary for people to get around. Improvements in workflows caused more jobs becoming unnecessary, and it's not always possible to replace them. As more jobs are replaced by AI and machines, more and more people will be out of work, which does not bode well for capitalist societies, which are based heavily around employment. Some possible fixes, such as a minimum guaranteed income for all, have been proposed, but as of yet, no clear situation has emerged. I recently read that there is a McDonald's that is completely run by robots, and I am so utterly confused with how that works and who I would even go to if they messed up my order. Number 7. Catastrophic natural disasters. Climate change is real, people, and it could very well result in catastrophic natural disasters in every city. I mean, we've already started to see the effects it has, but it will just get worse. Sea level along the US coastline is projected to rise on average 10 to 12 inches in the next 30 years per NOAA. For context, that will be as much as the rise in sea level measured over the last 100 years. That is not good news for the 127 million Americans in coastal counties. Due to climate change, flooding is expected to become more frequent and severe, and by 2050, scientists expect flooding to occur approximately 10 times more than it does today. Number 6. Cashless society. In a cashless society, financial transactions are not conducted with physical banknotes or coins, but instead with digital information, usually an electronic representation of money. Now, this might sound like a great and easy idea, but it actually comes with a lot of problems. One problem is privacy. In a digitized economy, payments will be recorded digitally. Going all digital, this data retrieved from transactions lead to widespread surveillance where individuals can be tracked by both corporations and the government. These records also might be available to hackers and can be made public after a data breach. This can also cause problems for the bankless. Cashless systems can be problematic for people who currently rely on cash, who are concentrated in certain populations such as the poor, disabled, elderly, undocumented immigrants, and youth. Electronic transactions require a deposit account in a bank or other deposit-taking financial institution and some familiarity with the payment system. Many people in impoverished areas are underbanked or unbanked. In the United States, almost 1/3 of the population lacked the full range of basic financial services in 2012. Not to mention that fraud would be easier. When payment transactions are stored in servers, it increases the risks of unauthorized breaches by hackers. Financial cyber attacks and digital crime also form greater risk when going cashless. Many companies already suffer data breaches, including payment systems. Electronic accounts are vulnerable to unauthorized access and transfer of funds to another account or unauthorized purchases. Attacks on or accidental outages of telecommunication infrastructure also prevent electronic payments from working, unlike cash transactions, which can continue with minimal infrastructures. Number 5. Dinosaur zoos. Humans love their zoos, and it's said we'll have dinosaur zoos with real woolly mammoths. Thanks to advances in cloning technology, we might be able to bring back animals like the woolly mammoths, but according to Akira Arani, a professor at Kyoto University, now the technical problems have been overcome. All we need is a good sample of soft tissue from a frozen mammoth. Russian scientists are working on doing just that, and the big question in the medical community is it possible, but should we do it? I think we shouldn't do it. I mean, has no one watched any of the 7 Jurassic Park movies? They show that this would be a horrible idea.
Number 5. Attack of the Dead Men. The Attack of the Dead Men refers to a military engagement that occurred during World War I on August 6, 1915. There was a Russian stronghold located near the town of Oswiec in the Eastern Front. It was a key defensive position for the Russians against German advances. The German army, as part of the wider Central Powers offensive on the Eastern Front, attacked the fortress, aiming to break through the Russian defenses. During the battle, the Germans employed chlorine gas, a chemical weapon to weaken the Russian defenses. The gas was intended to incapacitate or unalive the soldiers defending the fortress. Now, despite being affected by this gas, some Russian soldiers, driven by pure desperation and with cloths or handkerchiefs soaked in water covering their faces, counterattacked the advancing German forces. The gas masks available at the time were not effective against chlorine gas, and the sight of Russian soldiers appearing with their faces covered in white cloths and just blood-stained from the effects of the gas, it gave rise to this legend of the dead men. They basically looked like zombies rising up and moving towards the enemy. And the fierceness of the counterattack combined with the horrifying appearance of these Russian soldiers caused complete terror among the German troops. They fled, and they're still being attacked from behind. Many of them died, getting trapped in their own traps and stuff. Germans believed they were facing the spirits of the dead, panicked and abandoned their on the fortress. Really cool story. Number 4, an often overlooked dark historical event is the forced sterilization programs that took place in the United States. Hard to believe this actually took place, but it did, beginning in the early 1900s up until the 70s, if you can believe that. Several states implemented eugenics programs aiming to control the population and improve the genetic quality of society. One of the methods used was forced sterilization, targeting individuals considered unfit for reproduction. The victims of these programs were often people deemed socially undesirable, people with mental illnesses, disabilities, and individuals from marginalized communities, African and Native Americans primarily. It's estimated that tens of thousands of people were forcibly sterilized under these state-sanctioned programs. The exact number difficult to determine because of poor record keeping and the fact that these procedures were kinda swept under the rug. Number 3, the Great Molasses Flood. On January 15th, 1919, a massive storage tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses collapsed in the North End neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. The Great Molasses Flood, also known as the Boston Molasses Disaster, resulted in widespread destruction and loss of life. The tank had been poorly constructed with weak rivets and insufficient safety measures. At around 12:30 p.m., the tank suddenly burst, releasing a wave of molasses, estimated to be about 25 feet high, moving at a speed of 35 miles per hour. The molasses wave engulfed the neighborhood, causing significant damage to buildings and streets and the Boston Elevated Railway. The disaster resulted in 21 people losing their lives and around 150 others being injured. The tank had been filled to capacity just 2 days before, and the increased pressure probably contributed to this collapse. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops. So the USS Cyclops was a United States Navy cargo ship that mysteriously disappeared during World War I. The ship was used primarily for transporting coal and was one of the Navy's largest fuel ships at the time. In March of 1918, during World War I, the USS Cyclops departed from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and made stops in Barbados and the Virgin Islands. Its final destination was Baltimore. The ship never reached its destination, though. It vanished without a trace along its route, disappearing in the infamous Bermuda Triangle. No wreckage or survivors were ever found. Various theories have been proposed as to why the ship vanished. Could have been from a storm, structural failure, or an enemy attack, but none have been proven, the disappearance of this ship resulted in the loss of 309 crew members and passengers, making it one of the largest non-combat losses of life in U.S. naval history. And finally, we're gonna finish things off with a bizarre one, with the trial of a corpse. This happened in January of 897 AD, several months after the death of Pope Formosus. After Formosus died, his body was exhumed and he was put on trial. Not before he died, after. The trial was orchestrated by Pope Stephen VI or 7th. There's some debate on that, but he really just wasn't a fan of Formosus. Stephen accused Formosus of perjury, violating church laws, and of being an illegitimate pope. During the trial, Formosus's 7-month-old rotting corpse was dressed up and placed on a throne. A deacon was appointed to act as his advocate, answering questions on behalf of the dead pope. Formosus was found guilty on all charges. His papacy was declared invalid, and his acts as pope were declared invalid. 3 fingers on his right hand, which he had used for blessings, were then severed, and his remains were thrown into a river. After Pope Stephen VI's death, Pope Theodore II annulled the whole trial and restored Formosus's honors and good name. He called the trial a travesty, declaring the verdict null and void.
One morning in Jodhpur, India, the sky didn't just thunder, it screamed. On December 18th, 2012, residents across the city heard a deafening explosion from the sky. No aircraft, no weather systems, no military activity, just a massive, ear-splitting boom that shook homes and rattled windows. The sound lasted for nearly 5 seconds and was heard over a wide radius. Here's where it gets really creepy. Scientists, meteorologists, and even defense agencies investigated and came up with absolutely nothing. No seismic activity, no sonic booms, no atmospheric anomalies. Some compared the sound to what's heard before meteor impacts, except no impact was ever found. To this day, no one knows what caused the Jodhpur boom. There's a river deep in the Amazon that literally boils alive anything that falls in it. And it shouldn't exist. Located in the Peruvian rainforest, the Shinay Timpishka, or Boiling River, reaches temperatures up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 93 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to kill small animals instantly. What's bizarre is that boiling rivers are typically found near volcanoes or geothermal hotspots, but this one isn't near either. Andreas Russo, a geophysicist, studied it in 2011 and confirmed there is no volcanic activity to explain the heat. Local legends speak of the river being sacred, protected by spirits. Scientists are still baffled. What heats this water so intensely remains a mystery. Lightning is supposed to strike downward, but in Oklahoma, it decided to go up. On a stormy May evening in 2010, a NASA aircraft studying thunderstorms captured something shocking. Gigantic bolts of lightning shooting upward from the cloud tops into space. These are now known as gigantic jets, but here's the catch. Even after multiple recordings, scientists still can't fully explain how or why these massive lightning bolts leap 50 miles up into the atmosphere. They behave nothing like typical lightning and challenge everything we thought we knew about electrical storms. What if I told you there's a place on Earth where lightning strikes up to 260 nights a year for 10 straight hours a night? That is a lake in Venezuela home to the Catatumbo lightning. This freak weather system produces more than 1 million lightning bolts a year, and it's been going on for centuries. What causes it? Well, that's the puzzle. Scientists have a few theories. Heat, moisture, mountain ranges, but none can explain why it's this intense and this consistent. It's like Earth's own version of a haunted electrical storm. Imagine stepping outside and seeing red rain pouring from the sky. Sounds kind of like a horror movie, right? Well, it actually happened twice. In the Indian state of Kerala, red-colored rain fell for weeks in 2001 and again in 2012. Initial theories ranged from dust storms to algae, but lab tests found something even stranger. Red particles with cell-like structures, but no DNA. That led to a wild theory from some researchers that the particles could be extraterrestrial in origin. While that's still debated, created, no conclusive natural explanation has ever been agreed on. The skies remain one of the weirdest weather events in modern history. In the remote tundra of Siberia, the ground itself suddenly exploded open, forming massive, perfectly round craters. The first of these sinkholes was discovered in 2014, some as deep as 100 feet. Scientists initially blamed melting permafrost, but that didn't account for the explosive force or the strange shape. Later studies showed the craters were likely caused by underground methane gas igniting under pressure, but no one's fully sure what triggers these massive blasts. One of the craters was even large enough to fit a helicopter. These natural time bombs are still appearing, and they've got researchers deeply concerned. What if you could hear a low, constant hum and no one else could? In the small town of Taos, New Mexico, hundreds of residents report hearing a mysterious humming sound day and night. The problem? No known source can be found. No machines, no underground pipelines, nothing. The phenomenon, nicknamed the Taos hum, has been studied since the early 1990s. Some say it's tinnitus, others blame electromagnetic interference, but the hum is directional, and people report being able to move closer or farther away from it. It's been picked up in other parts of the world too, from the UK to Australia, but there is still no clear explanation. Giant rocks, some weighing hundreds of pounds, mysteriously move across the desert floor, leaving trails behind them. Welcome to Racetrack Playa in Death Valley. These sailing stones have baffled scientists for decades. The rocks appear to move entirely on their own, often in different directions as if pushed by an invisible hand. In 2014, researchers finally observed thin ice sheets combined with wind slowly dragging the stones, but not all the stones moved at the same time, and some trails changed direction mid-movement. Something even their model couldn't explain. The mystery isn't entirely solved. Some still believe there's more going on beneath the surface. In 2011, a group of treasure hunters stumbled across something at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and no one knows what it is. At nearly 200 feet wide, the object looks like a crashed UFO, complete with right angles, symmetrical features, and even what some believe are stairs. It became known as the Baltic Sea Anomaly. When sonar images went viral, scientists rushed to explain it away as a rock formation, but here's the real kicker. Some dive teams reported electronics malfunctioning near the site. Geological surveys come back inconclusive, others argue it's just a glacial rock, but until someone recovers a sample or maps it properly, it remains one of the strangest underwater discoveries ever. In a rare celestial twist, the sun rose 2 days early in Greenland, and no one's quite sure why. On January 13th, 2021, residents were shocked when the sun appeared 48 hours earlier than expected after the polar night. Normally, they don't see the sunrise again until January 15th. Some scientists speculated it might have been due to unusual atmospheric refraction caused by melting ice, others blamed shifting horizons, but even these explanations didn't account for the full effect. Locals described the phenomenon as deeply unsettling, like time had reset itself. Whether it was an optical illusion or something more cosmic, it left scientists digging through models for answers and coming up short. Nature is supposed to follow rules, laws of physics, weather patterns, predictable outcomes, but clearly it doesn't always get the memo. From boiling rivers with no volcanic source to unexplained sounds from the sky, these natural events remind us how little we actually understand about our planet. And maybe, just maybe, some things aren't meant to be understood.
Things off at number 10 with the Sultana explosion. The Sultana explosion was a major disaster that happened during the American Civil War. On April 27, 1865, the steamboat Sultana, overloaded with Union soldiers recently released from the Confederate prison camps, exploded on the Mississippi River near Memphis, Tennessee. It is one of the deadliest maritime disasters in US history. The ship was designed to carry around 376 passengers, but on this particular day was carrying an estimated 2,100 people, including Union soldiers who had survived the Confederate prison camps like Andersonville. And the boat was overcrowded because the government paid a bonus for every soldier transported home, and the Sultana's owners, eager to, of course, make more money, ignored safety regulations. And the explosion occurred around 2 a.m. when the steam boilers ruptured, causing a massive fire. The disaster claimed the lives of over 1,800 people, many of whom were killed in the explosion, while others drowned or succumbed to injuries in Bossier in the cold river waters. The exact cause of the explosion is still uncertain, but it was likely due to a combination of factors, including overcrowding, poor maintenance of the boilers, and the use of low-quality materials in the vessel's construction. Next up, we have the various types of human species. This is something that has always fascinated me. In the very distant past, there wasn't just one or two, but a total of 8 different human species that roamed the earth. These ancient relatives of ours existed at various times and in different parts of the world. Some existed at the same time, though. We Homo sapiens are the only surviving human species today. That's pretty obvious. The history of our family tree, though, pretty diverse. One of our earliest cousins was Homo habilis, who lived in Africa around 2.4 million years ago. They were skilled tool makers, scavengers. Then came Homo erectus. Probably heard of them. They appeared around 2 million years ago, and they were the first to venture out of Africa, spreading to Asia and beyond. Neanderthals, of course, or Homo neanderthalensis, lived in Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were skilled hunters. They even created art. It's believed we just killed them all off, but some of their DNA actually still lingers in our population to this day, particularly amongst Europeans. Then we had Homo floresiensis, known as also hobbits, who inhabited Indonesia's Flores Island and stood like 3 feet tall. That'd be about, I guess, this. Homo naledi, a recently discovered species in South Africa, and we can't forget, of course, about the mysterious Denisovans, known from DNA extracted from a finger bone. They're an ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, though. They lived in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And finally, this one here lived in what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe. Number 8, rat kings. This is just really icky. I remember when I first heard about this, I cringed. Just the thought of this is awful. Rat kings are an odd and incredibly eerie phenomenon that has been reported a number of times over the years. So these occurrences involve groups of rats, typically 4 to 8 of them, becoming entangled by their tails, forming this like disturbing rat cluster. Pretty gnarly sight. The exact cause of rat kings is kind of a mystery. Some experts speculate that it happens when rats nest closely together in warm places and their tails become intertwined over time. Others suggest that it could be a result of just chance, of course, or unusual behavior amongst the rats. Rat kings have been reported in various parts of the world: Germany, France, and the United States. Number 7, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic. This one is very strange, similar to the dancing plague. If you watch this channel consistently, you know what that is. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962 is one of the strangest events in history, and I only just learned about it today. It all began in a remote girls' school in Kashasha, a small village in what is now Tanzania. Started with just 3 students who suddenly burst into uncontrollable fits of laughter, seemingly for no apparent reason. What made this phenomenon especially baffling was how infectious it proved to be. The laughter quickly spread to many of the other students, affecting 95 out of 159 girls at the school. And these episodes of this hysterical laughter varied in duration, lasting anywhere from a few hours to several days. They not only disrupted the normal routine of the school, but also extended to the point the school was actually forced to close its doors. Even more perplexing was the fact that the extensive medical examinations conducted at the time didn't identify any physical or infectious cause behind this odd behavior. And the main theory among experts is that the laughter epidemic was psychogenic, so it stemmed from a psychological or emotional factors rather than some physical source. Believed to be a form of mass psychogenic illness, where the power of suggestion played a significant role in triggering and perpetuating the unusual laughter. Kind of like that dancing plague.
And at number 4 we have the Black Dahlia, otherwise known as Elizabeth Short. She was an actress in the 1940s who was found dead in horrible conditions. She was naked and had been cut in half through the waist. Her organs were removed and placed under her, fully drained of blood, and her mouth cut from ear to ear. Okay, sorry about the vivid description, but holy moly! Absolutely insane. Nobody was ever caught for the murder, and personally, I have a hard time believing that anybody could manage to do something like that to another person. Again, there has been no claim that it was a demon or a mythical creature, but whoever did it was definitely more than demonic. Alright, coming in at number 3, we have Le Lion. This legend comes from people claiming that there was a mysterious being lurking in the mall's forest, who is known to wear a full camo outfit plus a gas mask. A gas mask, I mean, they're terrifying enough on their own. If I see someone in a gas mask, imagine getting on a bus and someone comes on with the gas mask. Yeah, I would be freaking out. Well, for 10 years, this was nothing but an urban legend based on a few eyewitnesses' accounts. But then in 2013, somebody actually got a picture of him. A few months after the picture was taken, his mask and camo was found in the woods along with a note that said that he was harmless and couldn't stand being looked at as a monster anymore. Nobody knew if he took his life or decided to just disappear and live out the rest of his life in peace. But either way, poor guy just wanted to disappear and looked like he came straight from Chernobyl. I mean, we gotta leave him alone. Number 2 goes to the one and only Jack the Ripper. How do we make a list like this and not include this guy, whoever he is? Well, Jack the Ripper was one of, if not the first major serial killer who was never caught. The guy terrorized the streets of London, England in the late 1800s, so some time ago. He was known to kill and disembowel local sex workers, slit their throats, and disfigure their privates. I mean, absolutely insane. I don't understand what is going on with this guy. What's his problem? What's his deal? Nobody ever figured out who he was. I don't know if I want to know who he is. Although there have been some pretty sizable handful of suspects, it would suck to be like not the real guy, but you're suspected to be this awful, terrible guy. Some people even thought that he could have been an evil ghost. Either way, he definitely became a sort of like a boogeyman type figure during the years he was active. And finally, in at number 1, we have Charlie No Face. Is this real life right now? Your name is No Face? Mr. No Face was known to show up to people who were walking around at night, appearing out of nowhere with a face mishap enough to make the unsuspecting person go running. But Charlie wasn't some terrifying demon coming to steal your soul or kill you. He was a guy who touched active electrical wires as a kid, and that's what it resulted in. Well, he knew that people would be scared to see him, so he opted to go for walks at night to avoid scaring too many people. He sounds like he must have been a sweet guy, but he didn't stop people from coming up with this urban legend about him.
We're starting off the list with Unit 731 and its human experimentation. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Operating in Japanese-occupied China, particularly in the Pingfang district of Harbin, Unit 731 conducted inhumane experiments on thousands of Chinese, Korean, and other prisoners of war, as well as civilians, including women and young ones. The unit was responsible for numerous atrocities. They conducted experiments to study the effects of biological weapons such as anthrax, plague, and cholera on human subjects. Prisoners were infected with these deadly diseases to observe their progression and develop methods of contagion. Often subjected to dissection without anesthesia, they were also exposed to freezing temperatures to observe the effects of frostbite. Some experiments involved forcing victims to stand barefoot in the snow until their limbs froze, allowing researchers to study the gangrene that followed. Researchers also tested various weapons like bombs and flamethrowers on live human subjects to observe their effectiveness and impact on the human body. Some prisoners were tied to stakes and used as targets for grenades and other explosives to study the effects of shrapnel wounds. This is just the tip of the iceberg too. The things carried out here were absolutely nightmarish. And at number 9, we have human zoos. These were actually just what they sound like. You'd think human zoos are something out of like a science fiction movie or something, humans being held in captivity and observed in their quote-unquote natural habitat by aliens, but this really was a thing right here on Earth. There was a human zoo right in Coney Island. Human zoos existed, shockingly, up until the 1930s, possibly even further than that. Really, not that long ago. Human zoos were public exhibits of people, typically from non-Western cultures, displayed in a zoo-like environment during the 19th and early 20th centuries. These exhibits were part of colonial exhibitions and world's fairs in Europe and North America. These zoos were made to emphasize the belief in the cultural and racial superiority of Europeans over non-European people at the time. People from various indigenous cultures and ethnic groups, Africans, Native Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, they were often brought to these exhibitions. They were made to live in mock natural habitats, perform dances and ceremonies, and regular daily activities, all within the confines of a designated exhibit area. Exhibits were often accompanied by posters and pamphlets and educational displays, reinforcing these very stereotypical and misconceptions about the exhibited cultures. Pretty wild stuff. Next on the list we have the radium girls. The term radium girl refers to female factory workers who were employed by the United States Radium Corporation in New Jersey and the Radium Dial Company in Illinois. In 1917 to about 1926, these workers were responsible for painting watch dials with a luminous paint containing radium. What they weren't told at the time is that radium is incredibly toxic. These workers were tasked with using small brushes to paint radium-based paint onto watch and clock dials to create precise markings. They were often told to shake the brush using their lips and tongues so that they'd have a more kind of sharp tip. So they were just ingesting radium on a regular basis. Over time, many of the radium girls began to experience some serious health problems: anemia, bone fractures, necrosis of the jaw. They also developed various cancers. As these health issues started coming to light, some of the women sought legal action against the companies. In the 1920s, several workers filed lawsuits against the USRC and Radium Dial Company for negligence and demanding compensation for their suffering. In the end, this case played a big role in the types of safety standards we have in workplaces today. Number 7, the Kalavrita massacre. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Most of you have probably heard of the massacre in Oradour-sur-Glane, France, by SS soldiers. Well, stuff just like that was happening all the time in World War II, and this incident was very similar but much less known, at least outside of Greece. This massacre occurred during World War II in December of 1943. It was a brutal event carried out by German forces in retaliation for the Greek resistance activities against the Axis occupation in Greece. During the German occupation of Greece, the Greek resistance movement actively fought against these German forces. In response to the resistance activities, the SS targeted civilians, especially in small towns and villages, as a means of punishment, and they just wanted to send out a message. On December 13th, 1943, German troops, part of the 117th Jaeger Division, surrounded the town of Kalavrita in the Peloponnese region of Greece. The soldiers systematically destroyed the town and its surrounding villages. Men, women, and children were gathered in the town square. The Germans separated the men from the women. The men were while the women and young ones were locked inside a school building, which was then set on fire. Those who attempted to escape the burning building were by the German forces. Some women and children managed to escape though. One German soldier couldn't stand it anymore and opened a door, allowing some prisoners to flee. The soldier was later punished by death. After the war, some of the responsible German officers were tried for war crimes, but most of them escaped justice, and some were never even identified. Next on the list we have the Vipeholm experiments. These unethical experiments were conducted on mentally disabled patients in Sweden between 1945 and 1955. The experiments aimed to study the effects of sugar on dental health. This was initiated by the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare to investigate sugar consumption and its effects on teeth. The study took place at Vipeholm Mental Institution in Lund, Sweden, and test subjects were the institutionalized residents a VIP home, many of whom had mental disabilities. They were vulnerable, they couldn't provide informed consent. The subjects would be divided into two groups, with one group being given unrestricted access to sugary foods and candies, while the other were given controlled amounts. The aim was to observe the progression of dental cavities in these groups. Excessive amounts of sugary foods were given to some of the patients, far beyond what would be considered normal or healthy. Surprisingly, this led to severe dental problems. The researchers were deliberately inflicting harm on vulnerable people, and what makes this whole thing even sadder is that the results of the experiment weren't even released until years later because of how bad it looked on the confectionery industry, who were actually helping financing this. So this led to some to believe that the researchers were bought off just to keep quiet. It wasn't until the 90s where the cruel nature of these experiments finally came to light, being condemned by the public.
Number 5. Fell out of a ride. In September 2000, a guest fell out of the Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin ride in Disneyland and suffered serious internal injuries, cardiac arrest, and brain damage after being dragged underneath the car. The speculated reason for this was a malfunction with the lap bar. It was said by witnesses that the bar on the cart to strap the rider in did not lock in any position, there were no safety straps, and the bar did not go over the rider's lap. Now, according to investigators with Cal/OSHA, the state safety agency, the lap bars in the ride's cars are raised and lowered manually by the Disneyland ride operator and worked independently of each other. Disney said park officials believe that their employees followed all the park procedures, including those for lap bars. The police and the Disney president said that there was no malfunction with the ride to cause this. The guests lived, but there was a serious delay between the time of the incident and when medical emergency personnel were contacted, leading Disney to review and change their policies. Unfortunately, it was too late. The guests lived for 9 more years with the consequences of that fateful ride until they passed away in January 2009. Number 4. Drownings. In June 1973 and in June 1983, guests drowned in the River of America's attraction in Disneyland, both after violating the rules. The first incident involves 2 brothers who stayed in the park after closing. They stayed on Tom Sawyer's Island past closing time by hiding in an area that is off limit to guests. When they wanted to leave the island, they tried to swim across the river, though one of them didn't know how to swim. The older brother attempted to carry his brother on his back and drowned halfway across. His body was found the next morning, while the younger brother was able to stay afloat by dog paddling until a ride operator rescued him. The second incident involved a man drowning by trying to pilot a rubber emergency boat from Tom Sawyer's Island, which he and a friend had stolen from a restricted area of the island during Disneyland's annual grad night. The boat capsized and he drowned. Both individuals were intoxicated at the time of the incident, and the victim's mother sued Disneyland for allowing her inebriated son onto the premises, but the lawsuit was unsuccessful. Number 3. Hit by another car. In 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Young was riding the Matterhorn bobsled in Disneyland when her seatbelt was unfastened. She fell out and plummeted to the track below, only to be hit by another car and get dragged along the rails before the ride was stopped. Due to this, she got decapitated. She was pronounced dead at the scene due to her massive head and chest injuries. Afterwards, an investigation found that her seatbelt was not buckled. It's unclear whether she deliberately unfastened her belt or if the seatbelt had malfunctioned. Since then, the section where she was struck on the Tomorrowland side of the mountain has been known as Dolly's Dip, and park employees claim that she still haunts the ride. Former ride operator named Kristen, who worked at the park from 1989 to 1995, claimed that she could feel a supernatural presence while operating the Matterhorn, and that other staffers told her they had seen a ghost while on the job. She said, "I worked that ride for several years and I never saw her, but I sure did feel her." Number 2. Being crushed. In 1974, an employee named Debbie Stone was crushed to death between a rotating wall and a permanent theater wall in the America Sings attraction in Disneyland. At around 10:30 p.m., when the last show got over and the stages were shifting positions in between the 45-second interval, a guest from the adjacent theater heard a blood-chilling scream. When he and the operators rushed to the scene, they were horrified to see Debbie Stone crushed between the walls of the 2 theaters. To this day, no one knows exactly what went wrong, but there have been numerous theories. Some state that Debbie may have been inclining towards the adjacent stage to talk to a fellow cast member, or she may have attempted to jump from one stage to the other, or she may have been distracted and stepped backwards without noticing. Either way, this death was just Tragic. And coming in at number 1 is not caring for disabled guests. Disney is supposed to be a fun place that includes everyone no matter their differences, but it seems like the park didn't take their disabled guests into consideration. In 2009, the ride It's a Small World Holiday in Disneyland broke down while the other guests were evacuated off the ride, while this guest was not, as he was in a wheelchair. The guest was stuck in the ride's goodbye room, the final setting of It's a Small World Holiday, for 30 to 40 minutes before being evacuated. In addition to being wheelchair bound, he also suffered from panic attacks and high blood pressure, and these things were aggravated by the blaring Christmas carols due to them being unable to exit the ride. Rather than calling firefighters to evacuate the guest, Disneyland staffers waited for the ride to be fixed. When the guest was finally able to lead the ride, it took 3 hours to medically stabilize them at a Disneyland first aid station once they were rescued. The guests sued Disney for its inadequate evacuation procedures for disabled guests and for not providing proper warnings for those who could not evacuate during a ride stoppage. In March 2013, a jury awarded the man $8,000 and the safety key was introduced.
Urban legend of a guy named Cropsey. Cropsey was a boogeyman type of beast that would disembowel kids at night. Parents reassured their kids that Cropsey didn't exist, but apparently he might have existed. He might be real. In 1987, a man named Andre Rand was convicted of kidnapping multiple children in the 70s in the same area where the legend spread. He denied being involved with any disembowelment, but enough people filled in the blanks and spread the word that Rand was a notorious Cropsey. Alright, following that up, at number 9 spot we have Candyman. Candyman is basically about a ghost seeking revenge and breaking through a bathroom mirror to take its victims. Kind of like a Bloody Mary almost. Have you guys ever turned off the light, stared at the mirror, and said Bloody Mary 3 times? Don't do it. It's pretty terrifying. But apparently this urban legend is kind of based in fact. In the 1980s, a woman was home alone when an intruder broke into her apartment. Not through her door or window, through her medicine cabinet. Apparently the cabinet was installed to exposed pipes so the plumbers could easily access them. But the killer managed to get into the neighboring apartment, and then they broke into her bathroom through the cabinet and they killed her. And apparently it wasn't uncommon for burglars to break into apartments this way. I had no idea. I'm locking up my medicine cabinet. I'm locking up all my mirrors tonight. So yeah, apparently being murdered by someone coming through your vanity isn't as supernatural as Candyman made it seem. And at number 8 is Hermit of Maine's North Pond. For nearly 30 years, hikers, canoeists, and campers would find that their belongings would regularly go missing. Of course, with nobody being found for so many years, countless rumors began to spread. A poltergeist, a mysterious animal. Until one night in 2013, a man named Christopher Knight was confronted by park rangers. Well, it turns out he had been living alone in the woods for 27 years, keeping tabs on everyone who stayed there and would steal from them in order to survive. Well, he confessed to around 40 robberies per year. That comes out to be about 1,000 robberies in total. I mean, thankfully it wasn't a ghost, a demon, or a monster. Just somebody who wanted to be left alone and live off the grid. Next up at number 7 is none other than the Zodiac Killer. Officially has been connected to 5 murders and 2 other attempts in the 60s and 70s, but in one of his many letters he confessed to at least 37 murders. Is this real life right now? He was known to send coded messages to newspapers, and in one of them he even said who he is. But the code so far has been impossible to break. Well, you know what? I'm starting to think there is no code. How could someone be so intelligent to write a code in the 60s and 70s, and with all the technology we have now, nobody's able to break the code, and nobody to my knowledge has come up with any sort of, supernatural theory to who he is. I mean, there's a lot of people who we think he is, but we just never found the real Zodiac Killer. Number 6 today goes to Alice Killings. This legend says that between 1999 and 2005, a span of 6 years, a series of murders took place in which the killer left behind a single playing card with the word Alice written on it. It would be written in the victim's blood. These murders all mirrored each other exactly down to the name of the victim. However, these murders apparently never even took place, but it said that the legend was based on an actual serial killer who did leave the playing cards next to his victims. It's just that there's no actual indication of an Alice or other spooky similarities between the killings. Alright, halfway now, and at number 5 on our list we have the Bunny Man. So not the boogeyman, I'm saying the Bunny Man, you know, the scary little creatures that is so cuddly and scary. And well, in the 1970s, the Bunny Man was a guy who was known to gut and hang rabbits from under the overpass and eventually moved on to larger victims. The larger victims being people. Teenagers specifically. Locals were cautioned to stay away from this bridge, especially during Halloween time. And is it just me, or is Halloween coming up right now? Well, it's thought that this urban legend was rumored to originate from an actual grown adult man who would wear bunny ears and terrorize people with a hatchet. I mean, if a guy's coming at me with a knife and he's wearing bunny ears, he's not in the right state of mind, and I'm running as fast as I can. While he didn't actually remove the guts from anybody, this sounds absolutely terrifying, kind of like those clowns that, do you guys remember those clowns that were trending, that were just appearing in like towns and stuff? They would just stand on the road and just stare at you. Yeah, I thought I wasn't scared of clowns until a few years ago. But you know what I am afraid of? I think I'm afraid of scarecrows. Yeah, because you don't know if there's an actual person, like, in there.
Number 4. Antibiotics will stop working. We've come to depend on antibiotics as a quick fix for so many medical ailments. But what if the medicine just stopped working? In recent years, doctors have begun discovering antibiotic-resistant illnesses. At first, there were only a few, but now more and more diseases are developing an immunity. So far, the response has been to encourage people to take their full course of antibiotics instead of stopping when they feel better, according to NBC News. There will eventually come a time that antibiotics are no longer effective. Now, what will a post-antibiotic world look like? It's not entirely clear just yet, but it would be more than just not being able to get medicine for basic illnesses and infections. Humans could lose the ability to perform surgery, as doctors would be unable to fight off infection after the procedure. Now, there are other antibiotics out there, medicines that kill infectious bacteria or viruses but don't destroy human tissue, but even if they were discovered tomorrow, it would take years of testing and development before they could be widely used. Number 3. Nuclear war. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima is nothing like modern nuclear weapons. The United States has approximately 4,000 nuclear warheads in its arsenal. Russia is testing bombs that can decimate entire countries. Also, newly designed nuclear weapons can create radioactive tsunamis that render targeted areas unlivable for decades. Rogue nations such as Iran and North Korea are desperately trying to obtain nuclear weapons. And according to CNBC, China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal and could have 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030, part of Beijing's ambitious military buildup. As of 2021, humanity has about 13,410 nuclear weapons, which personally just makes me a little uncomfortable. And if things go south and there is a nuclear war, large parts of the Earth become uninhabitable due to the effects of nuclear warfare, potentially causing the collapse of civilization and, in the worst case, extinction of humanity and/or termination of all biological life on Earth. Number 2. Breaking apart the internet. Society has only had global internet for a few decades, and it has already changed almost every aspect of life. I mean, Google is a godsend. Now, global communication has been a revolution in human existence, and that's why the idea that it may soon disappear is frightening. Dubbed by experts the splinternet or the internet cold war, it's reaching a point where a global internet becomes a problem for countries who can't get along with each other offline either. Essentially, the splinternet will be multiple concurrent internets that aren't connected but are separated based on regions or ideologies or any other things. These parallel internets will be difficult or even impossible to go between, cutting humankind off from one another and allowing for more tightly controlled networks. This is especially appealing for more authoritarian countries. Even countries that simply have different laws for dealing with things on the internet might begin to seek out alternative regional networks. Russia is already in the process of launching their own separate internet, internet. North Korea is believed to have one for several years. China has an isolated internet thanks to the so-called Great Firewall, which blocks access to anything the Chinese government deems to be a problem. In just a few years, you might see a direct schism between the open internet and a more locked down, authoritarian-friendly version. And coming in at number 1, robots could take over the world. AI is moving too fast, and with all these robots, they could take over the world. Don't believe me? In 2016, CNCB did an interview with Sophia the robot. Sophia is being developed to eventually work in therapy, education, and healthcare, but she made it clear that she has other ambitions too. Sophia was asked, "Do you want to destroy humans?" She then responded with, "Okay, I will destroy humans." Then at a RISE convention in Hong Kong, of Hanson Robots facilitated a discussion between robot Sophia, yes, that same Sophia, and Han. Ben asked Sophia about her goals, and she dutifully says that her goal is to make the world a better place for humans, which is sweet. But then Han interjects and says, "I thought our goal was to take over the world by 2029. I'm sorry, that's literally only 6 years away. Now, they aren't the only robots saying this though, as when Philip K. Dick's robot was questioned in a 2011 interview with PBS, he engaged in thoughtful conversation with his interviewer and eventually provided a calm yet chilling answer to a question many of us have on our minds. Will robots take over the world, Terminator style? The robot's response was, "Geez dude, you have all these big questions cooking today. But you're my friend and I'll remember my friends and I'll be good to you." Aw, so sweet. But then it continues, "So don't worry, even if I evolve into Terminator, I'll still be nice to you. I'll keep you warm and safe in my people zoo, where I can watch you for old time's sake." I'm sorry, people zoo. People zoo. You're telling me a robot has come up with the idea of a people zoo and is thinking about keeping humans there. I do not want to live in a world where robots are in charge, because that is scary.